we're going to start with my favorite, careers and research. My favorite and also yours, right? Yeah, of course. Yes. All right. So, in terms of careers and research, a large number of doctoral degrees are granted in research-intensive subfields, so a third of doctoral degrees. That being said, most psych majors, don't become psychology majors because they enjoy research. There's a variety of reasons for that. But there are some common student misconceptions about psychology and the practice of psychology. One misconception is that psychology involves only applied work, right, like counseling, when in fact psychology, it is important to have an understanding of the research and to do research. And also, most people don't realize that research and statistics are foundational for many different careers and graduate programs in psychology. This is particularly true for the PhD level, and as well as the PsyD level to a slightly lesser extent. There are a few different areas in which one can do research with a psychology degree. The first is experimental psychology. So in our department, we have a couple experimental psychologists. So Dr. Imam, he's an experimental psychologist. He researches how people behave, right? Learning and behavior, classical conditioning, that sort of thing. Also Dr. Kanda, she researches how the brain works, right? So like that Atkinson-Shiffrin model that we talked about yesterday, that's something that an experimental psychologist would research. And most students who go into experimental psychology, they not only learn how to do these experiments, but they pick a specialty. Like Dr. Imam's specialty is operant conditioning and classical conditioning, and Dr. Kanda's specialty is cognition and learning. Right? So they had specialized training in those areas. Developmental psychology, so the developmental psychologist in our department is Dr. Young. And so her research focuses on how people develop, how they change across a lifespan, and then also how cultures vary in terms of prototypical development across the lifespan from childhood through adulthood into older adulthood. Social psychology, that's going to be Dr. Yost in our department. Social psychologists look at how behavior is influenced by the situation in which someone is in. For example, you guys might have heard of the Milgram study. It's a classic study where the participant was instructed by a person in a white lab coat to administer shocks to someone, right? And they looked at, the researchers examined, how does that situation of being told to do something by an authority figure, how does that influence how far you'll go? And they found something like 50 to 60% of people went all the way to like the XXX, you're going to kill this person if you go this far, when told to do so by an authority figure. So that's the type of thing that social psychologists look at. Not anymore. They don't do that anymore. That was like in the 60s. Definitely can't do that anymore. Cognitive psychology. Again, this is going to be Dr. Kanda as well in our department, looking at how people think, how their memory works, that sort of thing. That's what cognitive psychologists are going to look at, memory and cognition. And then we have biopsychology. That's going to be Dr. Murphy in our department. And biopsychology is like a very micro level type of psychology. I mean, if you think about psychology in general, we're thinking big pictures. A big picture. How do people behave? How do they act? How do they act in different social situations? Whereas biopsychology is very micro level, and it's like, how do neurons in the brain work, right, for example. Very micro level. So that's biopsychology. Like if you're a type of person who wants to be pre-med, for example, biopsychology, in our department we call it cognitive neuroscience, would be a good option. Any questions about anything so far? All right. So what types of settings do people who have a research-related PhD work in? Typically, it's going to be academic settings, right? Working in a college, university, medical school. That's where, you know, two-thirds of research PhDs are going to work. Responsibilities include teaching, research, service. That's going to be things like I have to do service here at John Carroll. So, like, for example, I'm a member of the Institutional Review Board. That's service to university. That's part of how I'm evaluated. It's 20% of how I'm evaluated. 40% is teaching, 40% is research. And then administration, you know, managing people, you might have some of that as well. Like, for example, Dr. Yost is the chair of our department, so currently he's in an administrative role, right, managing our department. A smaller percentage, about a quarter of research PhDs go into the private sector, doing research or administration. And in terms of salaries, it's going to vary. One thing that is definitely true is people will make more money in the private sector than they will in universities, right? So a research PhD is going to make less money working as a professor than they are if they're in the private sector, working for companies, working for for-profit organizations. They're also probably going to have less flexibility in their schedules, so that's the trade-off there. In terms of earning a doctoral degree, there's about 100 doctoral programs in these areas that we discussed earlier, and 50 in experimental psychology more generally. The nice thing about these types of degrees is the funding that you get, right? So you, because they're research-based degrees, the federal government has funds so that students don't have to pay for their tuition typically, and they also get a stipend for working as a research assistant or a teaching assistant. In terms of a master's degree in a research-intensive field, those are going to be relatively few and far between, but the largest number is going to be in that general experimental psychology realm. And there's two types of master's programs, and you're going to see this come up again when we talk about other areas in psychology. You have terminal master's programs and non-terminal master's programs, okay? Terminal master's programs are ones that terminate or end when you're done with the master's, or your education ends when you're done with the master's, right? And so these terminal programs train students for employment, whereas non-terminal master's programs are ones that are meant for people who want to go on to get a doctoral degree eventually, okay? So in other words, their education doesn't terminate, doesn't end at the master's level. It's likely to continue to the doctoral level. Okay, so working in areas related to research with a bachelor's degree. You can do research with a bachelor's degree, but the difference is that you're not going to have much control over the research, right? You're going to be helping someone who does have a doctoral degree do their research. You're not going to be the one that's thinking of the research ideas, right? So autonomy and control is limited. Autonomy and control are limited. So we have some jobs here, research assistant, data analysis or data entry, and then also advertising and sales. With the research assistants or a lab tech, there's going to be different tiers of research assistants. As one gains more experience, they go into higher and higher tiers, have more responsibilities, and earn higher incomes. We see here the average salaries for a research assistant, and it's going to be higher in the physical, life, physical, and social sciences. Okay, so lab technicians are going to be paid higher than research assistants. So lab technicians are going to be the ones who are like working with equipment, that sort of thing. Research assistants might be doing data entry or conducting interviews. Sales, another area. where bachelor's degrees are good, and these are going to be in for-profit settings. We see social psychology is a good background for advertising and sales. Um, Positions include account representatives, managers, and sales. Let's hear from, well, actually before that, let's look at the median salaries here, depending upon what sorts of sales a person is in. Again, these are bachelor's level positions. So careers in academia. Okay, so I have a career in academia. Uh, Academia is, I don't know, we got to have fancy words for everything. Academia just means the academic community. It means having a job in higher education in particular, like college. So it's going to be like professor, department chair, dean, university president. These are careers in academia, okay, college level careers. And it could be at a variety of different types of colleges or places of higher education. Um, and depending upon what level of education you're at in academia, it influences the extent to which you do research versus teaching. So at technical schools, community colleges, and professional schools, the main thing is teaching, okay, and very little emphasis on research. For universities and four-year colleges like John Carroll, it's going to vary. Like John Carroll is a relatively, uh, um, it's teaching-based primarily, but it has a little bit more emphasis on research. And then universities that have graduate programs where faculty are teaching in graduate programs, those tend to be more research intensive, less teaching. And about 25% of positions are in that sort of research-based graduate level of education where there's high expectations for research productivity, publishing, things like that. Yeah. Like community colleges and professional schools, like that would be like PsyD programs. So psychologists who teach in PsyD programs, they're not going to do very much research. They're mainly going to teach people on how to do clinical work. Other questions? Yeah. Yeah, is it? Okay. Yeah. Mute. Is that better? Is it? All right. That reminds me today, like, I've actually hesitate to tell you guys. I had my work on my teeth done, and they have that like, bzzz, a high pitched thing. Oh my God, it's awful. Like nails on a chalkboard. It kind of sounded like this, where I'm just kidding. It's like, pay attention. Anyway, so setting, yeah, the amount of research you do is going to depend upon the setting. There's going to be less emphasis on research on schools like John Carroll, four-year universities primarily. But still, there's going to be research that's done. So the teaching load is going to vary with the amount of research that people do. So community colleges, technical schools, people are teaching, professors are teaching anywhere between 5 and 6 courses a semester. Four-year colleges, like John Carroll, is going to be between 6 and 8 courses over the course of the year. In other words, 3 to 4 per semester. At John Carroll, it's 3 because we're a little bit more research intensive. A place like Kent State, if someone's teaching undergraduate there, it's going to be 4 or 5. And then we have the research-intensive universities. These are people who teach in graduate programs. They're only teaching, 1 or 2 classes a semester because they're doing more research, and the expectations for research are a lot higher. So to put into perspective, here at John Carroll, the expectation for research is probably 1 publication every 3 years, whereas if someone's teaching in like a PhD program, it's going to be like 3 or 4 publications every year. So substantially higher expectations. Academia is nice because work schedule's flexible, right? You don't work in the summer. You have like Christmas break off. Like for example, I set my own office hours. I pick when I want to teach. However, I work long hours, take work home, and I do have to work during breaks. It's a pretty nice gig, teaching, I think, because of that flexibility. It is true that, and I was talking to Rose about this yesterday, the one thing that is true is like work never goes away. It's not like 5 o'clock hits, you go home, your day's over. It's always sort of up there. I'm always answering emails, that sort of thing. So that is true. It's hard to put work away. It really becomes a part of who you are as a person, and it's hard to get away from it. People who do well in this sort of environment are self-starters, independent, because there's not going to be someone looking over your shoulder, right, telling you what to do. Yeah, and it is really a lifestyle, part of a person's identity, being in academia. Now, what type of training do you need to teach in academia? It depends upon where you're teaching. Community college, master's degree might be sufficient to teach. If you're teaching at a college or university, though, now you're going to need a doctoral degree, typically a PhD. PsyDs normally aren't employed. The primary employment of people with a PsyD is not academia. They may teach a class, here or there, part-time on the side, but they're not going to, that's not going to be their primary full-time position. Okay. And part of that's because most people who have a PsyD don't want to teach. That's why they went to get their PsyD. They want to do clinical practice. So there's some of that too there. I don't think I'd be wearing a sweater. It might, but anyway, this is taken. So it's kind of a funny story. So I come into my office at the end of last semester, early in the morning, and I look up. I put my key in the door, and I look up, and this is taped onto my office door. And I'm like, where? And so it was like became this like mystery. Like first of all, who took this picture of me, without me knowing, and then second of all, who put it up on my door. And then, so I brought it into my classes that day because I figured it was a student, and I'm like, okay, who did this? Who did this? And no one copped up to it. And it turned out that it was Ruta, our department secretary, who took this and put it on my door, like the last person I would have suspected. But anyway, what I did was I put this little thought, this was towards the end of the last semester, I put this little thought bubble up there, and I brought it into my classes, and I broke people up into groups, and I gave them extra credit, and we voted on this. Whoever came up with the best meme got extra credit, got like 10 points extra credit, the group. So, yeah, maybe it's something we can do towards the end of this lecture. You guys come up with memes for this. I forget. Um, yeah, you know, the thing is, a lot of them were inside jokes, so you probably wouldn't really hit in this situation. Um, yeah. But I told you a little bit about, but I enjoy being a professor in psychology. You know, you get to teach, interact with students. I really enjoy that. Do research. The nice thing about being a psychology professor is you have a lot of flexibility in what you can do. So I teach, I do assessments on the side, I do research. Like, you know, every day it's something different. We have here median salaries, probably lower than you think. You know, I wouldn't get a PhD if your goal is to make a lot of money. I'd just like go get an MBA or something if that was your goal. So just, you know, it's being practical here. But I mean, those salaries are relatively low, but people are on contract for 9 to 10 months in academia. So really, if you stretch it out over the course of the whole year, it'd be like 30% higher. And if you're in clinical psychology, the good thing is that teaching schedules are pretty flexible, so you can do stuff on the side, clinical work on the side, to make some extra money. All right, working with a bachelor's degree in teaching. I mean, some like high school teachers who teach psychology might have a bachelor's degree. But normally, if somebody's going to teach psychology at the high school level, they're going to have a major both in education and psychology. Okay. Probably because you're not just going to be teaching, you know, one class at the high school level. All right, so with that, we'll do reflection. What do careers in academia interest you? If so, why? So let's go ahead and do that reflection in your handout. All right, what questions do you guys have about careers in academia? Derek? 6 years to get tenure. So that's one nice thing about, another nice thing about academia is if you're hired on a tenure track position, after 6 years, if you're a solid worker, you get tenure and it's, you know, then you get academic freedom, it's difficult to get fired, etc. So it's good job security. Um, yeah, that's a good question. But not everyone's hired on a tenure track. Those are harder to get. One nice thing about being in psychology in particular is you guys may have noticed you guys are like the largest major, one of the largest majors on campus. I think you're the third largest major. So there's a lot more like psychology professors, for example, than there are philosophy professors or, you know, English professors or some of these less popular majors. There aren't as many job openings. But for psychology, there's going to be some of the most job openings of any discipline. So that's one positive. Other thoughts or questions?